Ushering offseason program, the Seahawks welcomed their rookie class and tryout players to the practice field for rookie minicamp starting on Friday. What went down to the VMAC? We're going to be diving into takeaways from day one of rookie minicamp here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on Blue Friday by my co-host, Nick Lee, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Whether you're listening down in El Paso, Texas, or overseas in Switzerland, we greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks open rookie minicamp today at the VMAC. We'll have some takeaways from the first action for this year's rookie class, as well as tryout players for Mike Macdonald and company. We're going to look at some salary cap creating scenarios for Seattle, because right now, if they sign their entire draft class, they are in the red. We'll look at some options for John Schneider and company and some draft superlatives as we do each and every year. Going to have some fun with this year's 8-player draft class, getting out the crystal ball a little bit as well. This episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I'll admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now for free on the App Store or Google Play. Now for your lead story here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Mike Macdonald, for the first time, orchestrating rookie minicamp for the Seahawks at the VMAC. And really, this is the first time that he's had the opportunity with players that have helmets on to conduct a practice, which he told us after practice, that's still something he's trying to figure out. He let Durde, the defensive coordinator, actually call the plays because he was trying to figure out how to run practice. It's still something that he's going to be figuring out with his coaching staff. So a lot of change, much quieter music out there on the practice field. It felt like he was coming from a locker, not the way that it used to be with Pete Carroll. So certainly that was a big observation today, and it's going to be a fluid situation as Mike Macdonald figures out how he's going to handle coaching duties, how his staff's going to do things, the way that they orchestrate practice. That's one of the things when you have a new first-time head coach, you should expect some of those growing pains for the coaching staff as they try to put everything together. But Nick, as far as takeaways, first big thing that jumped out to me today, and again, we don't get to see these guys with pads on. They're not playing real football. They're just doing drill work. But sometimes you just see guys that look the part. And Byron Murphy II today, signing his contract after practice finished up. So he's a Seahawk officially, got his 4-year deal. But you want to talk about a guy that looked the part of a first-round game wrecker. I don't know that I have seen a man with bigger, stronger calves than what Byron Murphy II has. And you can see how he previously was a linebacker and a running back. And you can see how he could play the nose tackle position at under 300 pounds with the tree stumps that he has for legs.
Yeah, Byron Murphy is first team all, first guy off the bus. He's just one of those guys that, okay, we're going to line up guys and getting off the bus. Byron Murphy's the first guy. Reminds me of that scene from Blind Side. I know that movie's kind of controversial now, but where they, he looks a little different. And I think Byron Murphy is that kind of guy. And I think Brock Heward was the one I've been listening to a lot of, post-draft chatter and Seattle channels. And called him just a great big ball of muscle. Like there's not, usually you think of interior linemen, got a little round around the midsection, kind of like me, a couple jelly rolls in there, but Byron Murphy and not quite like that. And I know it's crazy to think this way. And I see you, Corbin, I've seen you do this as well a little bit, a little Aaron Donald, like physique. I know that there's a game, on the field that needs to be played for those kind of things to be decided. But as far as physique, you look at Aaron Donald, 6'1", 285, 32.5-inch arms, 32-inch vert. You got Byron Murphy, 6'5", 297, 32.3/8-inch arms, and a 33-inch vertical. So really similar physical profile to one future Hall of Fame interior defensive lineman to hopefully in Seattle. It's time to turn the tables and torture the Rams for once with Murphy.
Yeah, that's what Seahawks fans will be hoping for. And I can at least tell you for the rookie mini camp, as far as looking the part, that Byron Murphy II absolutely checks off that box. Looking at a few of the other draft picks for the Seahawks, away from defensive line with Murphy, they invested 3 draft picks on their offensive line. And a lot of fans were wondering what we were going to see position-wise with Christian Haynes and Sataoa Laumea and Michael Jarrell. Well, most of those guys were playing exactly where you would expect. Christian Haynes, after playing right guard his entire college career, that was where he was lined up today for the first day of minicamp. And then you had Michael Jarrell at right tackle. That's where he played his entire college career at Findlay. The one that moved was Laumea, and he slid over to the left guard position. That does not surprise me. Those of you that listened to the interview that I had with Jim Harding, Utah's offensive line coach, he hinted at the positional flexibility that Laumea brings to the table, how they just threw him into the fire at right tackle when he was supposed to still be the right guard a couple years ago, and he handled it seamlessly. The Seahawks are going to move him over to that left guard spot, and that is his best chance to potentially see playing time early for this football team, because Laken Tomlinson, even though he's an experienced vet that has started a ton of games, he is on just a one-year deal, getting to be a little older player. That is not your long-term answer at left guard. If Laumea can come in and give him a run for his money right out of the gate, and you've got Christian Haynes as a plug-and-play guy at the right guard position, suddenly you're feeling a lot better about this offensive line, way better than what you did back in mid-March.
Yeah, I don't know if this is something you could possibly bet on, but if there's a ticket out there where with a plus number you can get perhaps these two, as in Haynes and Laumea, as your starting guards week 1, hold on to that ticket, because it's probably a pretty high number right now as far as odds. But I think that could be a ticket you could cash in pretty nicely week 1, because I don't think that's completely out of the question that you're looking at your 2 week 1 guards there. I know that's kind of crazy to say and we're here in early May, or rookie minicamp. That's a little bold, but I think it's just because Laken Tomlinson, he's been experienced, but he hasn't had a year greater than 57-point Pro Football Focus grade the last 2 years. He's been pretty bad, obviously, with the Jets. He's got the Jets stink on him a little bit, which isn't his fault necessarily. And then Anthony Bradford, I think, is a bit of a half a solid player. He's got a really good run game, kind of spotty at parts in the pass blocking. So I at least think that Haynes and Laumea kind of grade out better, well-rounded. So I could be talked into these two being, maybe not starting week 1. That might be a little crazy, but getting significant snaps very early on in the season at these spots. That's going to be, it's so weird. Here we are. This is so you and me, Corbin. I am fascinated to watch the interior offensive line this offseason and how it develops.
I am too, but that's just the football guy in me, and that's where football games are won, in the trenches, and the Seahawks have emphasized that with this draft. And if Laumea ends up really getting it done at left guard, and we expect that Christian Haynes is going to be able to do that right guard, it really does. It changes the prognosis for not just this year, but man, imagine a year or two from now, if those guys end up being building blocks in your offensive line with the young tackles they already have. Seattle might turn the tide here a little bit with a surprisingly stout offensive line in the next few years. So I think this is a good step. We'll see where things go. The other thing I can tell you, and again, this is just one practice, and still I feel very strongly about this. I don't think that the Seahawks have another quarterback that is going to be giving Sam Howell a run for his money as Geno Smith's backup. It's just not going to be happening. And this is really hard for quarterbacks coming in. They haven't played with these receivers. They're trying to learn an offense in real quick order, especially somebody like Talia Tagovailoa, who is a tryout player. You're just trying to get the offense down. But still, both he and Siobhan Cordero, they were all over the place today. Tagovailoa was overthrowing his receivers consistently. Cordero threw several throws into the ground, had a couple other throws that got away from him behind the receiver. It was one of the roughest outings that I've seen at a rookie minicamp, and I've been covering the Seahawks now for almost 10 years. I can't remember actually a more consistently poor practice from quarterbacks. And so that doesn't mean tomorrow can't be better for these guys, but it looks like to me at very best, you have a camp body with either one of those players. And I would not expect one of them to come in and start suddenly making things interesting for Sam Howell.
Okay, so check off the 2 Tagovailoas starting in the NFL box for now, where we won't cross it off, I should say. And then I know one thing that you're really excited about, Corbin, is just the offensive line in general, just perhaps the mentality, the scheming, just the attitude around the offensive line. It seems like it kind of circles around one guy who isn't exactly unfamiliar with Seattle traffic.
Oh, yeah, Scott Huff. And I can just tell you this from today, watching the way that he orchestrates drills. And this is not taking a shot at Andy Dickerson or any of the other previous offensive line coaches. There is something, I can't even put a finger on fully explaining it, but there's just something about the way that Scott Huff, I liked how Christian Haynes said it today. There's a tenacity to his coaching style. And it revolves around coaching fundamentals and just seeing some of the different stuff he was doing with his players today that, quite frankly, I've been to a lot of Seahawks practices over the last several years. I've gotten to watch a lot of individual O-line drills, and they were doing some stuff that I had never seen before that really quickly it looked to me like, man, these have a lot of application for when these guys get pads on. So I think that they're rave reviews so far, and I can see why. And I can see why Washington has kicked out so many good offensive linemen for the NFL with Scott Huff there. So that might be one of your bigger difference makers on this coaching staff. So I'm excited to see what he's able to do. Just it gives you more optimism. If the offensive line isn't very good this year, I'm sorry that I'm giving you that optimism, but that's how I feel right now. This early, there's a lot of things that could change. But with Scott Huff, the young lineman that they've got, some of the versatility they have, Nick, this is shaping up to be a pretty exciting next few months as we see how things go with the offensive line. Up next, the Seahawks are trying to sign the rookie class. They already signed Byron Murphy II. But in order to finish that off, they're going to have to make a move or two to open up some salary cap space because they will be in the red right now if they sign their entire draft class. We'll be diving into some ways that John Schneider and company can fix up a tight salary cap budget when we return here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Do you think Mark Stone has a hat trick brewing for the Golden Knights tonight? Is George Kirby going to strike out 10 or more for the Mariners on the mound? Are you feeling optimistic about Donovan Mitchell scoring 20 or more points against the Magic? You can bet on all of these on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by my co-host, Nick Lee, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Make sure to check out the Locked On Seahawks YouTube channel or wherever you listen to Locked On Seahawks. We had our latest in the NFL Draft coaching series drop this morning. Utah's Jim Harding, the assistant head coach and offensive line coach, breaking down Sataoa Laumea and his game coming to Seattle. Really fun interview. Make sure to check it out. Let's shift gears now, Nick, to the salary cap. We were talking to rookies in this rookie class, rookie minicamp. It's an exciting time for every team in the NFL when you bring in your new draft class, and there's a sense of optimism for every franchise. The Seahawks are no different, but as John Schneider alluded to yesterday on Seattle Sports 710, his weekly interview with Dave Wyman and Bob Stelton. In that interview, he was breaking down just how tight the salary cap is. And he says that they've got some things that are set up to budget for this. But if they signed their entire rookie class, they'd have negative $1.3 million in effective cap space, according to overthecap.com. In other words, they would not be compliant with the NFL salary cap. So, Nick, they're going to have to make a move here in the near future in order to be able to sign this entire draft class. They need to get that done. And luckily, they do have some mechanisms here. They don't need to trade DK Metcalf. We can stop with that stuff right now. That's not going to happen. Fans that are acting like that's how you create cap space, that is not what the Seahawks are going to be doing here. But they do have mechanism at their disposal. And I know there's two players in particular, Nick, that signed restricted free agent tenders last month that with the draft class coming in, Seattle now has more flexibility to do some reworking with a contract or just release the players outright to create cap space.
Yeah, if you're looking for a clean cut, not messy way to just make cap room without no trades, restructuring, or anything like that, John Radigan, thank you for your service. You appreciate you and your Army thing, but he would be one I would look at to cut. That would instantly save, I believe, just about $3 million in cap space.
Yep.
If my over the cap play time was correct, and which moves you from the red to the green. And I like Tyrese. I like Tyrese Knight, the linebacker at UTEP. And Corbin, don't call me crazy. Don't sleep on Patrick O'Connell. I think he had some nice moments in preseason last year. Radigan played 322 snaps last year. All but 20 of them were on special teams, which is something you can kind of create and make up for it in different ways. It's not like he's some irreplaceable part of your defense. And with some of the additions that the Seahawks have made this offseason, I haven't been really super jazzed about the linebacker position as far as depth and quality, but Tyrese Knight is a nice piece. And I'm not sure John Radigan fits into the future of this. So that could be one I look at as possibly parting away with to add $3 million in space and get back to the green.
And they could do the same thing with Mike Jackson. Now, that's tough in the sense that I have really loved what I've seen from Mike Jackson when he's gotten his opportunities the last 2 years. I mean, he was a rock-solid starter in 2022, and when he had his chance in the second half last year, the Eagles game, for example, he was near lockdown status in that game, winning on Monday Night Football. So he's done a lot of good things, but he's got a cap hit north of $3 million. And right now, I don't know that he's going to be starting in this secondary with Reek Woolen, Devin Witherspoon, and some of the other players they've got. And now you drafted Nehemiah Pritchett. You've got DJ James coming in from Auburn, two players the Seahawks are really excited about in the future. I just don't know that cap hit, that it's worth keeping him on the roster at that price point. I think you could say that was John Radigan too. I don't think Seattle wants to lose either one of these players, but they would want to bring them back on a more team-friendly deal. And this would not be new for John Schneider. He's done this with restricted and exclusive rights free agents several times over the years, where he has either cut players or he's agreed to a reworked deal with them that is going to lower the cap hit. I could see that being a situation where Mike Jackson and or John Radigan do that. That seems like the cleanest way to go about this. But there are other alternatives here too. DK Metcalf, you could restructure his deal, base salary, a chunk of it turning into a roster bonus. You're kicking the money down the road, which I know John Schneider's not a big fan of. But the reason, Nick, that I think this might actually be my favorite alternative here, you expect DK Metcalf. I know there's a lot of people talking trade out there, but you expect DK Metcalf to be a foundational piece for your offense moving forward. He's going to be entering the last year of his deal next year anyway. That is usually the sweet spot for John Schneider with his star players, to extend him. So even if he's got a bloated cap hit next year, John Schneider can just extend his contract with a new multi-year big money deal, and you can lower the salary cap for the 2025 season accordingly. So this seems like this would be sensible, because you're going to create almost $6 million in cap space instantly doing that. And you have the flexibility to give him a massive contract next year.
Yeah, that's the one I would point to as well. So the least messiest things I would do, cut probably John Radigan there, and then restructure DK Metcalf. I mean, you got to think about, he's 26. He's the same age as guys like Michael Pittman and A.J. Brown, younger than Deebo Samuel. I mean, he's fairly young, still at his peak. It's not like he's some aging, if he was like 29, 30, I would definitely we'd have a different conversation, but he's not. He's in his peak. He's, Pro Bowler last year, coming off a pretty solid year despite some inconsistencies in the offense. And like you mentioned, I think the biggest part is this: you could push all that cap, some of the cap, bloat it for next year, and then you could blow it up next year with an extension. I think that's a great way to go to keep one of your foundational, offensive pieces. And I would just, obviously the trading DK Metcalf thing has gotten a little bit out of control online a little bit, and I've even participated a few weeks ago with that, but it's not. That's not what's necessary here. He's a building block, and you got to find a way to make it work. And this is something I think that's a fairly easy thing to do.
Yeah, I think that this option is probably my favorite, just because I expect Metcalf is going to be part of this team long term. And so why not do this? You can just do the new extension next year and lower that cap hit from the bloated price point that it is going to be at after restructuring. You could do the same thing with Geno Smith. They did not fully restructure his contract, but as you were mentioning with the age factor here and the fact that you now have Sam Howell on the roster, who may have starter upside as a long-term heir apparent, if you do that with Geno Smith, you're looking at a $44 million cap hit next year. And that's going to make it more difficult to move on from him. And we don't know that he's going to be a guy that would want to give another extension to. It depends on how he plays this year. So I think fully restructuring there is probably not something that the Seahawks are going to be considering here. The two other moves that they could make here, one of them I'm big on, the other one I'm not. Julian Love, you have only one safety that is going to be under contract next year, away from Jarek Reed II that's going to be playing this year. And Rayshon Jenkins, his contract's really a 1 year and then wait and see proposition. So you don't really have a long-term starter that is signed right now, unless Jarek Reed II is going to come back from his ACL tear and be that guy. Julian Love was a Pro Bowler last year. I didn't think he played well the first half of the season. Second half, he was lights out, played fantastic football. He's only 26. He can play both safety spots. I am all on board on giving him a multi-year extension and being a focal point in this secondary moving forward. And you could structure the deal to open up a few $1 million by extending him. So that would be an option I'm in favor of. The one I'm not, I know that Byron Murphy II makes it there's a little bit more of a logjam at defensive tackle, but that is a good thing. That is a good problem to have. You do not need to trade Draymond Jones. You do not need to trade Jaron Reed. It's only going to save you a little over $4 million doing both those, and you would be subtracting a key veteran piece from your defense that needs as much talent as possible up front. So I am not in favor of doing either one of those things. I think restructuring Metcalf and extending Love would probably be my two favorite options here to keep everybody in the fold and open up the cap space.
I mean, yeah, you don't have to lose anybody there. And I am wary of paying safeties a lot of money all of a sudden. Not sure why I feel that way but there was some issues with that. But
you shouldn't have to pay him what you pay Diggs or
Of course
Adams.
not. Of course not. Yeah. But just a little PTSD there. I would absolutely hard no on trading Jaron Reed or Draymond Jones. The Seahawks finally have what could become a dominant defensive line with all these pieces. How does Mike Macdonald deploy all these is something that I go to bed smiling at night about. And it's finally here. We finally have the defensive line that we've all been just waiting for and pining for multiple off seasons. Why would you then take away from that? I just would hate that they finally got some dogs in the interior. Let's just let them loose and see what they can do.
Yep, I'm in full agreement. That would be a last resort thing that I would not consider. I would try to find other options that we did not talk about before I would explore that. Because I think Draymond Jones, we've got to see what Mike Macdonald can do with him. That is the thing that I'm fascinated about. And Jaron Reed had a great year last year, and he is a veteran presence that has already taken Byron Murphy II under his wing. That is going to be a great mentor for him to have as he gets into the NFL. And I think it gives him his best chance to really reach his potential, because Reed has become a guy that really has become a leader. He has become a locker room presence, a leader that I don't know that a lot of people thought he was going to become early in his career. So I don't think you want to get rid of either one of those guys right now. Keep them on the roster, keep as many studs up front as you can, and see what Mike Macdonald and his coaching staff can do with that group. It could be one of the best defensive lines in the NFL this year, especially if Byron Murphy II splashes right out of the gate. When we come back, we are going to have draft superlatives. We do this every year. We're going to be looking at best value pick and several other superlatives from this year's 8-player draft class. Don't go away. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends at Monopoly Go. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. That's a flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there is just so much good stuff going on in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for timed tournaments, or you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. There's so much you can get. You can get unique stickers that you can trade with a friend to complete big albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting your friends, and you're not going to get penalized like they do in the NFL when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. They've got a ton of different things, such as including mini games, unique mini games, digging for treasure, or a robot machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so go get off the bench and download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined for today's show by my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s. As always, thank you for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. It's time for our annual post-draft superlatives. We do this every year. We try to switch it up a little bit. We have different categories. We keep some of them, and then there's some new ones. We have a couple ones that we're really excited about this year, and it's really simple. We're going to have a superlative, and you and I are going to pick a player from this year's 8-player draft class and explain why we selected that player. So let's kick things off, Nick. Our first category here, our first superlative that we have for this year's group, best value pick. We do this one almost every year. We've had most valuable. Let's look at best pure value here, though, for the Seattle Seahawks.
I was tempted to pick Byron Murphy just because he fell to 16. Straight up, I'm going to avoid Byron Murphy in these categories because best value, Byron Murphy, best fit, Byron Murphy, best upside, Byron Murphy. We can have all of them for it. So I personally will probably avoid him. That's just my choice. I'm going to go with Laumea, the interior lineman here for best value, because you could possibly find you have that interview with a certain school's a certain school's coach that will not be named by me, but certainly a quality coach at a quality program. I'll say that much. Just the way they talk about him. So Laumea sounds like you could find a starting guard in the 6th round, which would be phenomenal. That's just as a reference. It's about where the Seahawks found Stone Forsythe, and I think Laumea projects way better than Stone Forsythe. So I'm going to go with Laumea here as the best value pick, because if you somehow find even a significant snaps guard at 6th round, maybe not week 1 perennial starter, but someone who can play significant snaps for you, provide good value, good depth, that is a really valuable pick in the 6th round.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the other guard that Seattle drafted at pick 81, Christian Haynes. I mean, those of you that were following me on social media as the draft was unfolding, when we got to pick 50, I was saying, John Schneider, pick up the phone, trade up and go get Christian Haynes, because we're talking about a 2-time All-American at UConn, not a blue blood in football. Basketball, sure, but not in football. They won 3 games last year. But this guy was one of the best players in the Senior Bowl. He is as polished of a pass protector as you're going to find. He's nasty in the run game. He's a good athlete that can get to the second level. He can get out on pulling guard assignments, on screens, and he's got sticky hands once he gets to guys. There's just so much to love about this kid. I had him as my 36th ranked prospect, just outside of the 1st round in this class. To get him at 81, a guy that I think has Pro Bowl, maybe even All-Pro upside with his polished game. That is something the Seahawks have not had at guard. To get him at 81 is an incredible value. Our next superlative, biggest wild card, and this one might be really interesting, Nick, because Seattle had 7 of their 8 picks after the 3rd round or 3rd round or later. So a lot of these guys could potentially be wild cards.
Yeah, I'm going to go with basically, what is the basic definition of wild card, and that's Mike Jarrell out of Findlay. I mean, he's basically a human wild card. We do not know hardly anything. I mean, we've gotten to know him, of course, in the post-draft process a little bit better, but we know virtually nothing about him on the field. Hardly any film, not any Pro Football Focus data. I mean, talk about wild card, but he could mess around and become a really quality offensive lineman. I'm not going to sit here and make any proclamations that he's not going to do anything at all. I'd love to see what this offensive staff could do with a guy like him. Certainly a wild card. I mean, he's just the definition of it.
I'm going to go with Tyrese Knight, and the reason that he's my wild card, the head coach for the Seattle Seahawks, is Mike Macdonald. And I look at the tape for Tyrese Knight, and sporadic has been the word that I've thrown around a lot with this kid, because as many tackles as he racked up, as many tackles for loss and sacks as he had, there are a lot of plays on his college film at UTEP where you can see him overshooting gaps or mispredicting where the ball is going to go. And sometimes almost looks like he's playing guesswork out there. Those are things the Seahawks are going to have to clean up. But who better than Mike Macdonald, who Roquan Smith was a really good player, became an elite Hall of Fame caliber player playing for Mike Macdonald. Patrick Queen was a bust the first 2 years. He just got a $14 million per year contract for the Pittsburgh Steelers and was an All-Pro last year. Mike Macdonald has a knack for finding linebackers and bringing the best out of them. So if he was sold on Tyrese Knight to pick in the 4th round, I trust his assessment. So this is a guy, I don't know if he's going to be ready to play on defense this year. But if Mike Macdonald is sold on him and believes that he can get ready quicker than some people are anticipating, with what we've seen Macdonald do, this kid could be an absolute star if he's able to put everything together with his athleticism, his playmaking ability, his versatility. So that makes him a real wild card to me, because he could be a guy that's just a special teamer, doesn't play much on defense. He could also be an absolute stud. And so that really makes him a wild card for the Seahawks. Our next one here, most likely day 3 Pro Bowler. I actually had to think about this because I had a couple of them that I think may have a chance to do that.
Yeah, I did too. This was a fun one because, you kind of got to think through scenarios. When I say his name, it's going to be a little surprising, then I'll explain myself. Nehemiah Pritchett at Auburn. And, 4.36 40, 92nd percentile, just blazing fast athlete. And I think it could be a Pro Bowl, maybe a 2015 Tyler Lockett situation here we got with, he averaged 31.3 yards a kick return at Auburn in 2021. Didn't really return much as became a more featured piece in their defense, but he's got the speed. And with the kickoff rules this year, I think that's all bets are off a little bit in that category. So watch Nehemiah Pritchett with that speed and the kick return experience, possibly as a return specialist Pro Bowler.
I'm going to go with Laumea, the 6th round pick out of Utah, as my most likely Pro Bowler. And there might be some people scoffing at that, but I mentioned this earlier in the show. Laken Tomlinson is a stopgap at best. And if Laumea comes in on day 1 at left guard and looks natural there, again, this was just a rookie mini camp. We got to see him actually with pads on, but I thought he looked very comfortable with his movements today, playing the left guard position. If he is able to come in and right away put some pressure on Laken Tomlinson to the point where he gets some snaps this year, Laumea has started a lot of football games. And, oh, by the way, and I know, Nick, being a BYU guy, you have your reservations about Utah, but Jim Harding does a fantastic job coaching guys up for the NFL. He's had a lot of guys come into the league and have success. I think Laumea is a player to keep a very close eye on because he can win with power. He is a really explosive athlete for his size. You can see it when he gets out in space. He can zone block. He can gap block. And in pass pro, I think playing inside is going to be much better for him than playing at tackle. And yet he didn't give up any sacks last year. He improved a lot in that regard. So he is the guy I'm keeping a very close eye on. All right, our next one here, most surprising. A lot of people would say biggest reach. We're going to say most surprising just from the sense that it sounds more positive, and I don't know that there's such a thing as a reach in the draft. Typically, teams all have different grades, but what was the most surprising pick for you in the 2024 NFL draft for the Seahawks?
Well, you kind of already touched on him, and that's Tyrese Knight. And not necessarily that I don't think he's, a good linebacker or anything like that. He's 118th overall. NFL.com projected him as a 6th rounder. Pro Football Focus had him near 200th on their consensus board. Yet he goes 118th to the Seahawks in the 4th round. You had linebackers on the board still like Jeremiah Trotter, who I'd pounded the table before several times. The Eagles got him. Tommy Eichenberg, I think he went to Las Vegas, was still on the board as well. And that Knight might end up being the best linebacker of the 3. I'm not saying he's not going to. I was just surprised, like, oh, that's who they went at linebacker. Okay. And I'm going to trust the process a little bit, like you mentioned with Mike Macdonald and his history with linebackers. So this is, again, not me saying, why'd they take Tyrese Knight? He's a bust. And that's not going to work. And that's just more like, I didn't realize that they had him so high on their board. But I guess we'll find out why.
A.J. Barner, same round, just a few picks after Tyrese Knight, is my most surprising. And again, I'm with you with Knight. Like, I'm not saying that Barner can't be a really good NFL tight end, because I think he can be. He is an excellent blocker. I think he's a better receiver than what his numbers show. If you go back and watch Michigan tape, there are some plays where you're like, this guy's got a little wiggle with the ball in his hands after the catch. So maybe in the NFL, especially with all the receivers Seattle has, this might be a guy that can do a little more damage in the passing game than what we saw at Michigan, which was a very run-heavy team. But I thought that he was a player because of his lack of receiving production. You don't see many tight ends where, well, he's a great blocker, but we need to figure out where he's going to be at to get to develop as a receiver. It's usually the other way around. I had a 7th round grade on him for that reason, not because I don't like the player, but I get the fit. I understand where he meshes with this offense and just the mentality they're looking for. that was just a lot earlier than I was expecting that he was going to go off the board. Our best chance at a second contract, and as you said, non-Byron Murphy, because I would easily pick Byron Murphy on here, but of the other 7 players, the best chance at a second contract.
Christian Haynes, interior lineman, he's got all of the traits you want in a quality interior lineman. Even if he doesn't become, an all-pro, Pro Bowler, you could still carve out a fine career. And if you stay healthy, stay available, and he realizes that potential that he showed at UConn and just stays healthy, I think that Christian Haynes can be an interior lineman for the Seahawks for 5+ years.
Yeah, I think this is a guy that could get 3 contracts when it's all said and done. That's how high on him I am. So I'm with you. I'm going with Haynes in this one too. I look at the polish, the fact that I think he can come in and win a starting job on day 1 and potentially be a Pro Bowl or all-pro caliber player. It might actually be a guard the Seahawks are willing to pay big bucks to keep. So I think that a second contract is definitely in the works for him if he plays the way I expect he's going to. Our last one real quick, best scheme fit. Nick, there are several players that you and I've talked about this before the show that we think are really good fits for what Seattle wants to do on offense and defense. So that might make this a little trickier.
And it's a little fuzzy, because we don't know exactly, X's and O's, what the Seahawks want to do quite yet with their new coaching staff. But for me, you already mentioned him. It'll surprise AJ Barner, the tight end, only because of the sound bites he's given, the attitude he seems to have of, I just want to play football. Y'all want me to block all game. You want me to catch 10 passes all game. I'll do it. And boy, every system needs a tight end like that. Ryan Grubb, I think, can probably find a place in that kind of offense for a tight end with that kind of attitude.
Yeah, I'm going to say Barner too, even though Byron Murphy to me is the best scheme fit here. I'm with you. I could have put Murphy on a bunch of these, and just because we have such high expectations for him. Barner, I'm fascinated by the sense that, and he mentioned this today when we were talking to him after the minicamp practice, and the relationship he now has with his new teammate, Jack Westover. Both of them played for Nick Sheridan. He was the tight end coach at Washington. Same staff with Ryan Grubb. He's now at Alabama as the offensive coordinator. Before he went to Washington, he was the OC for a couple of years at Indiana. Oh, by the way, A.J. Barner played his first 3 years at Indiana. And so Westover and Barner have both been coached by Nick Sheridan. There are going to be some similarities with this offense, and he's coming from Michigan under Jim Harbaugh. He just checks off so many boxes, which is why I can't complain about the pick. He just went earlier than I thought he was going to, but the scheme fit may explain why they drafted him when they did. And there were a lot of tight ends that were flying off the board at that point in the draft. So they may have felt like if we don't pick him now, he's not going to be here. You got to go get your guys. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Nick at Nick Lee 51. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up on Monday, we'll have our final takeaways from rookie minicamp, and we may have some updates on some contracts being signed by Seahawks rookies as well. You won't want to miss it. Enjoy your weekend, and thanks for listening in. Go Hawks.